Good afternoon, morning, evening, great souls. It's late afternoon where I am, but who knows where you are when you're watching this. So we are continuing with our adventure through the life of Christ. I had this fond idea that Easter would match Easter in the calendar, but we're not there yet. So the class, as many of you have already heard, is extending. I'm not sure, maybe half again what we've already done. We'll see. We're just moving through it. It's developed a life of its own, and I don't want to be in a hurry. I hope you don't mind. So let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Guru Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dearest friend and guide Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Beloved Jesus, guide us and bless us. Help us to understand the divine intention behind your words and your actions. And above all, help us to feel your living presence so that we may take the example and the adventure of your life and absorb it into our own consciousness, that we be guided and blessed by your example. We are your children. Lead us home to thee. Om, peace. Amen.
Life is a dream, time like a stream, carries our burdens away. Never despair, joys everywhere, love can befriend you today. Free from all care, like birds on the air, soar above griefs and worries, seek joy and be gay. Often on earth, things of great worth, worldly ambitions defy. Sometimes a friend helps us ascend up from life's cares to the sky. Love is a star, though shining afar, it can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh.
Life is a dream, time like a stream, carries our burdens away. Never despair, joys everywhere, love can befriend you today. Free from all care, like birds on the air, soar above griefs and worries, seek joy and be gay. Often on earth, things of great worth, worldly ambitions defy. Sometimes a friend helps us ascend up from life's cares to the sky. Love is a star, though shining afar, it can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh. Love is a star, though shining afar, it can guide us and help us toward light to draw nigh.
Okay, my friends, here we are. Here's where we are in our progress through the life of Christ. This is not a Bible study class, and I had to remind myself of that because now we're just sort of in the period of time when Jesus is carrying on his mission. So I've just pulled out a few incidences that seem of great importance to me, and then after we finish this, then we'll move on with the drama of his life. I'm not quite sure whether we'll quite finish what I've laid out today, but this will be sort of our exploring. And I recently got the same Bible that I've been reading, which is this combined chronological Bible of all the Gospels combined. And I bought a large print edition of it, which, it's not giant. I'll just hold it up just so you can see the print. This is going to sound silly, but it's the truth. I find it even easier to read because, sometimes the print in the Bible is so dense. But when it's laid out in an easier way, it's like the mind can absorb it. So just as a small and odd thought, nowadays these large print books, even if you don't have reading glasses, they're still a really valuable thing. So I wanted to just read first, I'm just going to read one little section, which is one of the times that Jesus raised someone from the dead. Now the reason I'm mentioning this, and then not today, but probably next week, we'll also talk about when Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, which is one of the most famous examples. But the reason I'm wanting to read this and bring it to your mind is to just get a feeling for what was going on in the life of Jesus at this point. He's come back, of course, from India. He's carrying out these 3 years in Israel, at the end of which he poses such a threat to the established order that they conspire to have him killed. So why and how did that happen? Well, he was traveling from one end of the country to another, and he was constantly doing miracles. He was walking on water, he was calming the storm, he was healing the sick, he was making the blind to see, and most dramatically of all, he was raising the dead. And he moved just as Master moved, just as Yogananda moved, completely according to how the divine was inspiring him. So it says, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. As he approached the town gate, a dead person was being carried out. I mean, sometimes I really enjoy the very plain language of this particular translation, which is not elegant, but somehow in its very lack of elegance, I really like it. A dead person was being carried out. So he's walking, and then there's a funeral. Now, those of us who live in America, especially now, of course, where everything is so completely behind closed doors. If someone dies, at least where I live, at Ananda Village, we take care of our own more. But here, where I live, someone dies, you call the mortuary, the car comes, these very well-trained young men come, and they put the body in a body bag and they carry it away, and you just don't have anything to do with it. The first time I went to India in 1986 and was in Varanasi and just saw people carrying their dead on a litter on their own shoulders, walking in, putting them on the funeral pyre, lighting the wood with their own hands. It just was so shocking to me because we just never do that here. But at this time, there's a funeral procession, and who's carrying it except the people involved? So a dead person was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. Now, of course, this is sad in all circumstances, but in those circumstances, it could also be tragic, because now she is completely alone. She has no husband, she has no son, she has no children. Who is going to care for her? Is she going to be homeless on the streets? And a large crowd from the town was with her. When the Lord saw her, his heart went out to her, and he said, "Don't cry." Now, I love that also, because there it is. There's this funeral procession going by. A widow, her only son has died. She's weeping, obviously. And Jesus' response is, don't cry. Just the compassion in him. Then he went up and touched the bier they were carrying the son on, and the bearers stood still. He said, young man, I say to you, get up. The dead man sat up and began to talk, and Jesus gave him back to his mother. Also that extraordinary line, Jesus gave the son back to his mother. There's stories in Master's life of him calling someone from the astral world. A man's wife, she had died. He had called Master and asked him to come and pray at his wife's bedside, but Master didn't come. But he went after she had passed. He had everyone else go out of the room. He put his hand, I believe, on her spiritual eye and perhaps on the medulla, and he called her back. And she said, when she came back, I heard your voice from a long distance away. So Jesus calls this boy back and gives him back to his son. They were all filled with awe and praised God. A great prophet has appeared among us, they said. God has come to help his people. And this news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country. Can you imagine? One person hears it and then tells the others and tells the others. So now these stories are being told about Jesus. And this is why the power structure becomes more and more frightened. Now, do you believe it? Do you not believe it? Who actually saw it? What did you hear? Was he sick? How did they know he was dead? But this wasn't an isolated incident. And, of course, all the other miracles he did, healing the body out of compassion. Now I'm going to change to a wholly other part here, which is, we're going back to John the Baptist. Now, we remember earlier from some earlier conversation that Herod had imprisoned John. And so Herod is now hearing, well, let me just go on for a second. Let me figure out where we're at here. Okay. Because John the Baptist spoke against Herod's marriage. He married his brother's wife, which was forbidden by the law, by the religious law. And John the Baptist took it upon himself to criticize the king for that, Herod, for that. And Herod did not like being criticized, so he put John in prison. But he also knew that John was a very powerful person with extraordinary abilities. So Herod wanted to stop the criticism, but he just held him in prison. He didn't know what to do about that. So here's from the Bible. For Herod himself had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put in prison. The last time we were together, I was showing you some beautiful paintings of that. He did this because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, whom he had married. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful to have your brother's wife. So Herodias nursed a grudge against John and wanted to kill him. But she was not able to because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be a righteous and holy man. So now Herod has taken his brother's wife to be his wife, and his wife is furious at John, and Herod is protecting John, so you can imagine there's a lot of undercurrents here. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him. There's many stories in history about how the person in power has power over the holy, wise man, but is ambivalent about it because perhaps a person in power like that recognizes power when they meet it, but doesn't quite know what to do with it. Finally, the opportune came for Herodias to carry out her revenge against John. On his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for his high officials and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and the dinner guests. People try to rewrite the Bible, but this is how it's written. The king said to the girl, ask me for anything you want, and I'll give it to you. And he promised her with an oath, whatever you ask, I will give you, up to half my kingdom. This is a sort of grand gesture of the powerful man. The daughter's name was Salome. Salome went out and said to her mother, what shall I ask of him? I mean, this is a pretty big offer. What shall I do? The head of John the Baptist, the mother answered. At once the girl hurried into the king with the request, I want you to give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a silver platter. Have you ever heard that expression since then? I want his head on a silver platter. It's a way of saying that you're really angry at someone. But this is how it began. I want the head of John the Baptist on a silver platter. The king was greatly distressed, but because of his oaths and that he had given in public in front of his guests, he did not want to refuse her. So he immediately sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. The man went, beheaded John in the prison, and brought back his head on a platter. He presented it to the girl, and she gave it to her mother. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it. Now this is, of course, the guru of Jesus. Jesus is out there antagonizing the authorities and the power structure. His guru, John, has been arrested by the king and held in prison, and then just like that, he's taken. And then another from the Bible, from another section, just a different summary of this. Now, and excuse me, this is afterwards. Now John has been killed, and Herod has his head on a silver platter, but he's hearing all these stories about what Jesus is doing. And for Herod, his first thought was, he heard about all the things that Jesus was doing and how he was working miracles, and some were saying that John the Baptist has been resurrected from the dead, and that this one called Jesus is actually John the Baptist returned. Now, again, this helps put it all in a human context. People knew about John, but who was Jesus? The king knew about John, but who was this other character? Others claimed that Jesus himself was Elijah. And still others claimed he is a prophet, like one of the prophets of long ago. But when Herod heard about this and all that Jesus was doing, John, whom I have beheaded, has been raised from the dead. I beheaded John. Who then is this I hear such things about? And Herod became interested in seeing Jesus. There's an interesting, that's the end of this Bible section. Just a moment, we'll go to another part of this. But when Master went to India in 1935, he went through Europe. In 1935, Hitler was just rising to power. Master said that Hitler had been Alexander the Great in a previous lifetime, who had gone into India and into Persia and had a great interest in yogis and a great interest in yoga. And Master tried to get an appointment to see Hitler, because Master said at that point, it wasn't clearly decided whether Hitler's power was going to go for good or for evil. Isn't that interesting? But Master wasn't able to see him. And of course, as they say, the rest is history. But here you have also Herod, who both admired and feared John, and now he hears about Jesus, and is it John reincarnated? And Herod becomes determined to see him. So also in this way, all of the energies of confrontation are beginning to build. Now, I just want to share with you two pictures of the execution of John the Baptist. So why don't we look at those pictures? There are many, many very gruesome pictures of this particular scene. But I wanted to show first this one. It's just a painting, a depiction. For one, it gives you the idea of how crudely things were carried out in Kali Yuga, and how also just the order was given for John to be killed, and one man goes up to John with a sword and cuts off his head just like that. John the Baptist must have known his hour of death was upon him. But nonetheless, just thinking about how these great ones take incarnation and then just live through what they have to live through. And then here's the next picture. And this is the picture of John the Baptist, his head on a silver platter, with Salome holding it, and her mother looking so vengeful above, just presenting it to the king. I'm not trying to emphasize the gruesomeness of this, but to realize, I guess what I'm really trying to say is these were real human events that all happened. We were probably, many of us, part of it. It was Kali Yuga, times were much coarser, but nonetheless, this is what these great ones went into, and this was a precursor, of course, of what happened to Jesus. So now let's just switch to our beautiful picture of Jesus. We don't need to watch John anymore. And Swami is singing one of his songs called Life Flows On Like a River.
Life flows on like a river that homes to the sea. 1 hour bounding through mountain vales, 1 hour winding through a lea. None may on the way, none may coax time to stay. Fleeting scenes move by us like a dream. Cling not, none will be your own, lest you grieve to be alone. Go within you, there's your home. Life flows on like a river that homes to the sea. 1 hour bounding through mountain vales, 1 hour winding through a lea. None may linger on the way, none may coax time to stay. Fleeting scenes move by us like a dream. Cling not, none will be your own, lest you grieve to be alone. Go within you, there's your home.
So now I want to go to the part of the Bible that's happening just at this time in the life of Jesus. And this is the part in which Jesus offers his disciples what has become known as the prayer, Our Father, the Our Father as people say it. And then we're going to look at some pictures of where we would go in Israel on pilgrimage for the place where it was said that the Our Father was taught. So now Jesus says, "And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. I tell you, they have received their reward in full." Swami says many things that Jesus intended to be humorous. We need to be looking at me for a little while here. There we go. Okay. Things that Jesus intended to be humorous are not always known as being humorous. For example, they have received their reward, which is that they have been seen. Swami says Jesus didn't mean that seriously. He meant that just as a joke. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask Him. This, then, is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their sins, your fathers will not forgive your sins. You know, that's presented as if God is keeping score. But what he's really talking about is the magnetism. I mean, if you talk about it metaphysically, it's that we create a vibratory universe and then we live in that universe. And if we have a hard, unforgiving heart, then the universe around us responds to us with a hard, unforgiving heart. And even when God wants to gift us with his vibrations of love, those vibrations can't reach us because of the hardness of our own hearts. He says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. These are such classic, beautiful statements. That which we worship is what we become. Therefore, I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. And are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow? They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grasses of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, O ye of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first the kingdom of his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Sufficient unto the day is the trouble thereof, Jesus says. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured out to you. Ask then, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened. For everyone who asks receives. The one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks, the door will be opened. Oh, these are amazing. Let's now look at the pictures that we were starting to see a moment ago. And what we're talking about now, as soon as we get the pictures open, there is a hillside dedicated and a church dedicated. They call it the Pater Noster, which means our Father. And of course, these areas are developed now. You can see highways and cars. But this is going to give you a picture of where Jesus was when he was in Jerusalem. The Paternoster Church is on what's known as the Mount of Olives, which contains a few very extraordinarily important places. And if you are physically walking in Jerusalem, you come outside the walled city, you go across this little valley, the Kidron Valley, and then you see the hillside, which was covered with olive trees and still has many olive trees, but not all. Just to give you an orientation, we are standing, in a moment we'll reverse the perspective. We're standing just outside the walls of the walled part of the Jerusalem Old City. We're looking across this area which was just, agriculture and open land when Jesus was there. You see the sort of Russian-looking gold spires. That's a Russian Orthodox church dedicated to Mary Magdalene. You can't see it, but just as you face it to the left, below it is the what is usually called the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus spent the evening before he was arrested. And when we get to that part of the story, we'll go into that church, and there's a stone there that they call the Rock of Agony, which was where Jesus prayed that night, and there's a grotto where he often met with his disciples. But moving uphill and to the right, you see a little church with just kind of a slightly odd-shaped church with a little bit of blue on it. That is the spot, it is said, where Jesus stood, looked across at the city of Jerusalem and said, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I would have gathered your children like a hen gathers her chicks." And that church is built in the shape of a teardrop because of the weeping of Jesus. And then where we're going to go next is you just continue uphill and you can't see it. But this is where Jesus would often take his disciples from the city of Jerusalem to various gardens and places and caves on this hillside. Now the next picture is just reversed. When you're standing approximately where we were and looking out across the valley there to the city of Jerusalem. And that's where Jesus was standing when he was weeping over the city of Jerusalem. So this is just to orient you. So now let's continue. And this is the view from the Our Father Church. You can see the things that we were speaking, the gold onion domes and the little teardrop church. And we're higher up the hill. The city of Jerusalem is just out of sight, but you can see where we are. And it's all very close. You can just walk. You can walk down from the top of the Mount of Olives down to the Garden of Gethsemane, across the valley, and we will into the very gate that Jesus went into when he was arrested. So now we're going to go to this church, which is built at a place and over a cave where Jesus was said to have instructed his disciples in the saying of the Our Father. Let's take the next picture, which is the courtyard. It is now a Franciscan, the Holy Land was put into the responsibility for the Holy Land shrines was given to the Franciscans some centuries ago. There's a Carmelite monastery here. Let's keep moving just so that you can see. The decoration here is the prayer, Our Father, in countless languages. Let's go and we'll look at some of those panels. And you can see this is in Cherokee, I think. You just walk through. It's not a very large church, that courtyard we saw. And let's look again. There's more panels. We have several. You can just see all the different languages. And it creates the effect that you would want it to create. We have one more, so let's look at one more of these. This is just a little walkway in the church if you're thinking about it, you realize all these different people in all their different cultures and all their different languages, the life of this one avatar through his disciples, because he was gone from the world so early, but his disciples and the disciples of the disciples, they just carried on until the whole world heard about it. Let's take another picture. This is the Carmelite convent that is there. It's a cloistered convent, so this is a very plain but extremely nice sanctuary there. And the nuns are on the other side of the grill on the right. So let's go to this next place. Also of great importance on this site is this grotto. And this is the entrance to it. You can see you have to go down a little bit, and then inside the grotto. And this is a very small cave. It's a small room, and you still have the bare rocks. And it is said that Jesus often met with his disciples, and some traditions say that it was in this very room, gathered with his disciples, that he taught them to say this prayer. It certainly has a very deep vibration. And then the next picture here is the church itself is not large, and you walk through that courtyard, and then you're in an olive grove here. And the grove continues off to the right, and there's a few seating areas. And so you can walk through and then be outside and be among the olive trees. And when you picture it before the church was there was the grotto, there were the olive trees and boulders and the ground where Jesus gathered with his disciples. So sitting here, let us all sit with Jesus in this olive grove while we listen to Swamiji chant, Door of My Heart. And he chants this now first in English and then in Italian and then in Bengali, which I think is a fitting remembrance for this particular church where the same prayer is in so many different languages. So we'll sit in the olive grove and listen for a while and then switch over to the picture of Jesus and just feel the wonderful devotional spirit of the teachings of Jesus that I was reading, the power of this prayer, the vibration that's behind it seemed very beautifully reflected in this particular chant.
Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Wilt thou come, just for once come to me. Wilt thou come, just for once come to me. Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Night and day, I look for thee night and day. Night and day, I look for thee night and day. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Wilt thou come, just for once come to me. Wilt thou come, just for once come to me. Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Night and day, I look for thee night and day. Night and day, I look for thee night and day. Porta del mio cuore, tengo aperta io per te. Porta del mio cuore, tengo aperta io per te.
verrai tu, una volta vieni a me, verrai tu, una volta vieni a me, fuggiranno i miei senza vederti, Signore, fuggiranno i miei senza vederti, Signore. Notte di, io ti cerco, notte di, io ti cerco, notte di. Già becchi e di noi amar vi polle ciorie, già becchi e di noi amar vi polle ciorie, divanisci acci bosci Asha potonirokie, divanisci acci bosci Asha potonirokie, hridayo kutirodar kola ache onibar, hridayo kutirodar kola ache onibar, daya kore ekbar eshe ki jurabe, দয়া করে একবার এসে কি জুড়াবে, দয়া করে একবার এসে কি জুড়াবে, দয়া করে একবার এসে কি জুড়াবে, দয়া করে একবার এসে কি জুড়াবে। Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Wilt thou come, just for once come to me. Wilt thou come, just for once come to me. Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Night and day, I look for thee, night and day, night and day, I look for thee, night and day. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Wilt thou come, just for once come to me? Wilt thou come, just for once come to me? Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Night and day, I look for thee, night and day, night and day, I look for thee, night and day. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Wilt thou come, just for once come to me? Wilt thou come? Wilt thou come? Just for once come to me. My days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord. My days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord. Night and day, night and day, I look for thee, night and day. Night and day, night and day, I look for thee, night and day. Night and day, night and day, I look for thee, night and day. Night and day, night and day, I look for thee, night and day.
Well, thank you, Swamiji. Now, I want to go to another, let's see, where are we? Another continuing part of the Bible, also very, very well known here. Let's see. There came a point in the ministry of Jesus, and it's very famous, when Peter was declared by Jesus to be the rock upon which he would build the church. And that's been institutionally interpreted to mean that Peter was the first pope, and that the rock upon the church that he would build was the institution of the Catholic Church. Master said the church that Jesus was referring to was the church of inner realization. And the reason that Jesus made that statement is because Peter was able to have an intuitive perception of the spiritual greatness of Jesus, which indicated the spiritual greatness of Peter himself, because he was able to know this. Now, just a moment, let me find. Oh, yes. Because you see, all during these 3 years, this is what we have to always remember when you think about the lives of these great saints. The Bible hadn't been written yet. The church tenets had not yet been declared. You didn't have thousands of other people, millions of other people, who were repeatedly telling you what all of these stories meant and who Jesus was. The people who were with Jesus had only their own actual experience to go on. And it was both controversial and actually at times dangerous to be considered to be a disciple of this man, because the power did not lie in the hands of Jesus and his disciples. And even political power, spiritual power, was all operating against this revolutionary movement. Now, at the present time, the movement that I'm part of, which is Ananda and Master and Swamiji, is by no means dangerous, but it's also quite outside of what is considered to be sort of the direction of our culture and the direction of our society. And in the area that I live in, there are certain churches, Christian churches, which are, have been, I think it's probably less true now, but I've been here for 30 years. They're networking centers. So if you're interested in, making good business contacts, and you don't go to the church just for that reason, but they're like a certain echelon of society, a certain business sector, and so on like that. There's many reasons besides just love of God why you would want to be part of those churches. There's absolutely none of that. There's no status whatsoever in going to the Ananda Temple of Self-Realization, even though it's just a mile or two away from some of these other places. The only reason that you would want to be there is because something in your heart is compelling you to be there. And there was a time, of course, during the life of Jesus, where the only reason you would be there is because your heart would know. Now, you're not a follower of Jesus by going into any institution, and you're not a follower of Jesus by not going to an institution. It's there if it's in your heart. And so that's what this particular verse is about. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" Now, you have to try to think, now, why would he ask that question? You're kind of leaning over, who do people say I am? In other words, what are you thinking? What do you think? They replied, "Some say you're John the Baptist," meaning somehow you're the resurrection of John the Baptist. Others say that you are Elijah. And still others say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. Now, interestingly, it is historically documented that all references to reincarnation were taken out of the Bible at a certain point in church history, a few hundred years after Jesus, because it was very hard for the church to have final say over people's destiny if they could just die and reincarnate. So that was literally the reason why it was taken out. But things slip through. Jesus says, "Who am I?" And they say, "You're Elijah, or you're Jeremiah, or you're one of the other prophets." What could we be talking about except reincarnation? Reincarnation was an understood part of ancient Judaism, actually. There are even scripture that refer to it. People just knew it was true. "But what about you?" Jesus asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God." Now you can see in the context, the first disciples, they tried to sort of get out of it a little bit. And then Peter was the one, when Jesus asked the question directly, Peter had the confidence to just declare, "This is what I perceive to be true. This is what I know is true." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven." Meaning this isn't intellectual. This isn't something you gathered from human experience. It was revealed to you by my Father in heaven, which means this was an inward, superconscious perception that you had. You were able to look at my physical body and see the divine power within it. "And I tell you that you are Peter." This is when his name was changed to Peter, which means rock. "And on this rock I will build my church. And the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone he was the Messiah. There's when you try to find, as I did try to find, like artistic representations of this, you always see Jesus with this big key in his hand, handing it to Peter. In the Festival of Light, Swami references obliquely this passage, and he says, "Into our hands have been given the sacred keys of awakening." And Master says this very reference, the keys to the kingdom of heaven, he actually said was the practice of Kriya Yoga, which is to say a capacity to awaken within ourselves superconscious perception, the technique of awakening superconscious perception. Master said that Jesus taught his disciples Kriya Yoga or something very much like it, meaning the kingdom of God is within you, and by these techniques of inner awareness, then you unlock the key to heaven, which of course, I mean, you can't really unlock the key. And then he says you will have power over heaven and earth, meaning you will be able, the material world is ruled from the spiritual plane, and you will have the power of the heavens and the power of the earth. Now, of course, many people took this to mean that Jesus would become a king in this world. Statements like this were interpreted to mean that the power of this world would be expressed by Jesus, and he would have dominion over the things of this world. Now, after saying all of this, then Jesus says, "But don't tell anyone." There's several reasons, of course, why he might have said that, but one of them is this was a very deep experience that Jesus was having with Peter and the other disciples, and such experiences are often not meant to be talked about casually. He was wanting the disciples to hold this energy within them rather than dissipating it by telling others. Also, it wasn't time. for Jesus to have this experience. So right at this same period of time, from that time on, after that conversation, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and on the third day he would be raised again to life. So now Jesus is establishing with his disciples, he's beginning to tell them what's going to happen. Because Jesus, as long as he stayed out of Jerusalem, he was much safer. When he was in Galilee, when he was in Capernaum, that wasn't the power center. But when he walked into Jerusalem and walked into the temple and challenged the temple, that was when he became a threat. And then that was when others would seek to eliminate the threat by eliminating him. So it must have been very hard for the disciples to hear Jesus say, I'm going to go to Jerusalem, and everything that you fear is going to come about. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke Jesus. Never, Lord, he said, this shall not happen to you. So Peter again is standing up strongly for what he believes. Jesus turned and said to Peter, get thee behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. So on Peter, on one hand, he turns and he says, you're the rock upon which I will build this church. And on the other hand, he says to Peter, you're so misguided, you're Satan himself. Just as Jesus was tempted after the 40 days in the wilderness when Satan offered him dominion over all this world. And Peter said, get thee behind me, Satan, I will not succumb. He says the very same words to his own disciple. And then he says to Peter, you're thinking about yourself and your desires and the things of this world, and I am here to serve God. So Peter is very praised, and then Peter is rebuked. But you can imagine Peter saying it. I myself had a scene with Swami like this. Swami was so unwell, and we had arrived on the east coast of the United States, and arrangements were supposed to have been made for Swami to be able to take a short airplane flight instead of a long car ride. And the arrangements had not been made. It just wasn't done properly. People weren't thinking it through. And he was so unwell, I really thought he was going to have a heart attack. And I pleaded with him to cancel his program. And he said to me, get thee behind me, Satan. Just that, like that. It takes your breath away. That's about all I can say. He said, I will die rather than break my word. And that was that. Although what happened next was at great cost, because I'd also been hesitating because of money. At great cost, we scheduled his airplane flight. But part of it was just to be willing to disregard all practical considerations. It was also for me to learn. He said that to me on another occasion, too, when I was encouraging him to give in to his weakness instead of standing up against it. And he would not tolerate that from me. So I mean, my little experience was not quite like this. But yes, sometimes that's simply what has to be said. It's the satanic force. When Swami had made the decision that he was being called to India in 2003, at the age of 77, in not particularly good health, he was being called to start a work there. The decision was made to do it, and then Swami just said, he could feel the satanic force trying to persuade him not to go. And the words of the satanic force were the same words, more or less, that I'd spoken to him on a couple of occasions. Oh, you've done so much good work, and now you're tired and your health isn't good. You really need to take care of yourself. And Swami said he could just feel it, like this seductive force that was just drawing him into this thought. And he didn't give into it. He repudiated it because it was the satanic force. But these forces are often playing, and they, as Swami said, Satan insinuates himself into our consciousness by means of our own false reasoning. So it's not like we know. It's like this thought starts coming. Well, you could do more good work just staying here Europe where it's more comfortable and it's all established, and you have a lot of other things you could do. You don't have to do this. And it takes a real power of discrimination on the part of us and the part of our leaders to just understand, where the force of God lies in all of this. Now, at this same period of time, an experience happened at the top of Mount Tabor. Mount Tabor is now called the Mount of Transfiguration, because Jesus took a couple of his disciples, 3 of his disciples, to the top of this mountain, and they were allowed to have this tremendous vision of who Jesus was. And so that's the experience of transfiguration. And here's what it says in the Bible. And this is all this same period of time. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and that's St. John of the Gospel, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah, talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." I always love that. Peter's just trying to be helpful. Jesus is on this high mountain. Moses and Elijah appear. Moses is, of course, the avatar who founded the Jewish tradition, who had the burning bush and the tablets descend. Elijah is from the Old Testament. Elijah will come first before the Messiah comes. Elijah is the previous incarnation of John the Baptist. I mean, and there's the 3 disciples, and they're seeing this in vision. And Elijah and Moses come and start talking with Jesus. So it's not as if these forms are just sort of ephemeral. They've manifested. So Peter wants to be helpful. He's a tent maker. I'll make tents for you. You can all just stay here. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." So these 3 disciples, apostles, are having this experience. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. I mean, they were just overwhelmed. They couldn't remain standing. There's a divine voice speaking to them, saying who Jesus is. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one but Jesus. So the 3 disciples were part of this vision. They heard the voice of God, and then they were knocked to the ground. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them again, "Don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." So even though these words could have gone out to the people, Jesus did not want them to go out. After I'm gone, and after I've been resurrected, then you can speak of who I am. The disciples asked him, "Why then did the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first?" And Jesus replied, "To be sure, Elijah comes and will restore all things. But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wished," meaning that he was executed. They imprisoned and they executed him. And he was executed by his own people, John the Baptist, who were giving all homage to Elijah, and Elijah was living in their midst, and they executed him. This is the power of delusion. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood he was talking to them about John the Baptist. The disciples kept this to themselves. It did not tell anyone at that time what they had seen. Amazing. So now let's look at the pictures. Let's sort of go to the place, the Mount Tabor, the Mount of Transfiguration, the Church of Transfiguration. I have to say from my own experience, my first visit to Israel, the Mount of Transfiguration was one of the most powerful places that I went to. Mount Tabor arises out of the flat ground like this. This is just a dramatic picture of what you can see of Mount Tabor itself, and you see the white buildings, which are, there's a few villages around the base of the mountain. And again, just imagine all of this is just open field with small villages, and I think those villages may be as old as Jesus, but it just gives you an idea of sort of the geography of what we're working with. So let's take the next picture. There was an Italian architect named Barluzzi that I've referred to before. He built five churches in the Holy Land 100 years ago, maybe about 100 years ago now. This is one of them. It's nice on the outside. Let's go closer up. You can see this is just different pictures of it. You come in, there's a steep road, just so you know, there's a steep road, and they have vans. It's a concession run by a particular village, and they take you up to a parking lot, and then you just walk this little distance to this small church. This is near the Sea of Galilee, so you see sort of looking, not the Sea of Galilee. Yes, the Sea of Galilee. So you sort of, it seems to extend off in the horizon because we're just a few kilometers from the water. So when you look out, you can stand on this platform and you look out and you see the Sea of Galilee. So we're sort of all in the same neighborhood here. And there used to be other buildings, and there's these ruins. That's what's rocks on the left and right. So let's go up closer to the church itself. You can see it's carved and put together in a very attractive way. Now we'll go inside. It's a beautiful church inside, with a lower altar, which you see, which is that sort of arched tunnel, and we're going to go close up. And then at the top, there's a mosaic, which is the three apostles, Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. So now we'll go, this is the lower sanctuary. This is a few of us meditating there when we were on pilgrimage. And then we'll go closer to the underneath, this beautiful carved and painted. This was all what the architect did to make it so lovely in there. So this is where the priest actually gives Mass and so on. And then there's this beautiful window with these peacocks in the window. It's just, let me just think for a minute. The whole atmosphere in there is, I guess the word is holy. It's so profoundly holy. And even though there's all this beauty, it's not that large and it's very simple. It's just a big stone church. And then we'll come out to the main room again. And here's looking up at the roof, the sanctuary. And you can see the mosaic at the upper altar here. And now we'll come in closer to it. You can see the three men. You can see Jesus, and then you have Moses on the left and Elijah on the right. Let's go even closer into this. Moses is holding the tablet of the Ten Commandments. And at the back of this sanctuary, you come into the sanctuary, you see the view, you see the arch where the peacock windows are, you go down. Then above that is this beautiful mosaic and that beautiful altar. And then at the left and right at the entrance, there's a small chapel, one dedicated to Moses and one dedicated to Elijah. So we're going to go into the Moses chapel, which is just this very small room with this painting of Moses at the top. And you can meditate in here, and the priests give Mass. Let's go closer to the picture of Moses. I always love to think about the artist with his paintbrushes, or I don't think this is a mosaic, I think this is a painting. And let's go over to the Elijah. This is the Elijah chapel. And we'll go closer. And Elijah was taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire. So that's what you're looking at there. You may remember when we were reading about Elijah and Elisha from the Old Testament way at the beginning. So there's Elijah and his chariot of fire. And then on either side of the main altars, on one side there's a beautiful little altar dedicated to Mary, and on the other side to St. Francis. So let's go look at the Mary altar. all of these places have, each of these, what are actually 5, 6 places in this church, each of it has its own vibration, but it's because the whole place is permeated with this, well, with the transfiguring power that Jesus experienced. So this is the little altar to Mary. You can, it's half covered by the lamp, but there's the eye inside the triangle is part of the painting there of the angels, and on the other side is the Francis altar, because it's a Franciscan. It's run by the Franciscans. Now let's go back to this is the mosaic. And Swamiji wrote 2 songs that are dedicated to Jesus being transfigured. And so now we'll listen to both of those songs. The one is called The Man That Was Jesus, and we'll listen to that twice. And then the song which some of you know, When Human Hopes Toward Thee Aspire. And he wrote that song inspired by the Mount of Transfiguration. Even if you're familiar with the oratorio, you might not have that clearly in mind. So as we look at this picture, which of course is placed right on the spot where Jesus had this experience, let's try to tune into what Swamiji was feeling, what James and Peter and John were feeling, that their beloved master took them to this hillside and then opened up for them this superconscious world, and also opened up to them this position that Jesus held in the progression of spiritual understanding. Elijah is their most revered prophet. Who was Moses? Master, Swami asked Master the question, was Moses a true avatar? And Master said, oh yes, of course. He talked about, because there's a story about how Moses raised the serpent in the wilderness, which is a clear esoteric reference to the Kundalini energy. Wilderness is often a synonym for meditation, for inner communion. So Jesus was called to be the avatar to the Jewish people. The entire experience of Jesus' life took place in the context of the Jewish people. Elijah and Moses and King David, of which Jesus was also a descendant, these are the towering figures of Judaism. And here Jesus is the Messiah carrying on this tradition. And the right word for it is the tradition of Sanatan Dharma. Judaism is the particular religious tradition that developed to become a thing in itself, but what gave Judaism its power, and why Jesus often talked about the pagans, is there are those who understand Sanatan Dharma, which is that which is, and then there are the pagans who don't. And the fundamental prayer of Judaism, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. I mean, listen, people of Israel, there is one reality, and that reality is divine. Now, sometimes that's interpreted to mean that all other gods are false, but that's not what the deeper meaning of that is. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. There is one reality, and that was pure Sanatan Dharma. And that the power of Judaism through all these centuries, with or without the acceptance of Christ, is because it's a Sanatan Dharma religion. And so Jesus was affirming with this vision, and also affirming for the sake of his apostles. So when they began to try to explain to their fellow Jews, what it was he was teaching, they could speak of the confirmation of the truth of what Jesus was teaching, because both Moses and Elijah, appeared in the same light. And therefore that begins to tell us that Jesus is a true messenger. And that's why the vision was given. So now let's listen to the songs that Swami wrote to commend this moment.
The man that was Jesus had shown his pure form. Upon a high mountain he stood, transfigured,
the first trip I took to Israel, which was, I guess, 4 years ago, maybe a little longer, 5 now. And I expected to have a very, the word I want to use is personal, a very personal experience of what I feel to be must have been my life at that time. And I didn't have that experience at all. I had a very profound, deeply moving experience all through the travel, the 2 weeks I was there. But it was all just sort of on a very impersonal realm. And especially when I went to that place, oddly, there was sort of like a little patio off to the side. And I was in the church, and then I just went and sat in this little patio, and you could just feel, because that experience was so much bigger than the personality of anyone involved. And there was just this overarching divine response that is constant, this constant divine response to when human hopes toward the aspire, dark woods of grief are set afire, beyond all reach of human skill, thy love alone our hearts can fill. It can't be, it's ever new. That's what we're looking for. It's ever new. Now I'm going to shift, and I think I'll have enough time to at least start. I want to talk about Mary Magdalene. We've talked about Peter, and now we're talking about Mary Magdalene. It's become very, recently people are rewriting a lot of what has been biblical tradition and conversation about Mary Magdalene. And when I've made certain statements in the past that Mary was the sister of Martha and the sister of Lazarus, that the woman taken in adultery, the woman who cleaned Jesus' feet with her hair, was all Mary Magdalene. And that Mary Magdalene was a courtesan and a woman, a well-known woman of low moral character, who became in love with Jesus, in a divine sense, and was completely transformed and uplifted by him. I have received suggestions that none of that is true, or not all of that is true, and I actually put out the effort to research it carefully, to find the sources in Master's writings, in Edgar Casey's writings, even in church tradition. And so I'm going to now just say it. And if you're convinced of something else, thank you, but I've been informed, and I think I'm going to stay with what Master and Swami have taught me. Because it's the drama of it. She really was someone quite different than she became. And part of that is the real power of the life of Christ, is that she was transformed by her devotion to him. So in the Bible, there's this story about the woman caught in adultery. Now, just, I'm not a woman who fights for the rights of women. I'm a woman who just assumes the rights of women. And I understand that politics demands, culture demands, there's huge human dramas going on. But there's no drama with God. It's yin and yang. It's one and the other. And Mary Magdalene was an extraordinarily important disciple of Jesus. And in addition to her, as I'll read in a moment, there were other women, this group of women who followed Jesus and were very important in his ministry. Mother Mary herself was the focal point of the disciples' devotion for 20 years after Jesus died, until Mary herself left. When we get to the very end of the story, we'll talk about that. So, but society, the Essene sect of Judaism, treated men and women equally, but the others sects were caught in Kali Yuga. The Essenes had remained loyal to a higher age. The other power factions had become infected with Kali Yuga consciousness, which was hierarchical and divided. And even the definition of adultery, a man could not be accused of adultery. Of course, a woman can't commit adultery alone, but adultery is a married woman. So the woman was caught in adultery. At dawn, let's see where we are. At dawn, Jesus appeared in the temple courts where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing Jesus. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." Mm-hmm. So if it was Mary Magdalene, if it was her, and she was acting as a prostitute, I mean, who knows? She wasn't, I actually said Mary, the woman caught in adultery, was Mary Magdalene, but I'm not as certain of that as I am as other things. But in any case, there she was. So it's often, though, that's brought all together as one story. So now I would like to show you just a couple of pictures, just to give you a feeling for what that moment was, and we'll listen to one song of Swamiji before we close. So this is simply an artist's rendition of what that moment was when this woman was brought. Now, the story is about the woman, but not really. Yes, the story is about the woman because of the way Jesus was able to bring her out of that life. The story is also about the times and about what Jesus was standing up against. Here's this terrified woman on one side who's been accused of this, great blasphemy against God, to behave in this manner. And then there are all these men who are they're about to stone her to death. And of course, Jesus could just as easily have been stoned to death by this angry mob. And so he stands there up against them. Let's look at the next picture. And this picture, again, is more poignant. And you sort of see her just completely cowed and humiliated, and look at the pride of the men around him. And then Jesus is also asking, what is this that is happening? And then this last picture, which is in many ways just the most beautiful of all when you think about it, because he's protecting her. In the others, he's not standing between her and the crowd. But in this one, you see he has his hand down and he's protecting her. And of course, whether or not we're literally crouched against a wall with the avatar standing in his physical body, holding his hand out to us, at all times, that's where we're actually living, whether we know it or not. We're sort of in this world trying to find our way, and the avatar is literally, the master is that close to us, and he is that engaged with us. He's protecting us as much as we allow him to, and inviting us to come into his light. So for the last song today, we'll hear the song "To Souls That Were Fallen." To souls that were fallen, he spoke of God's love and coaxed them with kindness to turn back again. "Forsake," he said, "the fulfillments of earth, for the comfort they give you lasts hardly an hour.